If you want to avoid more political arguments with your family members this Thanksgiving, take a break with me while we dissociate and talk about a rock. But not just any rock, America's most famous rock ever, Plymouth Rock, which is the supposed landing site of the Pilgrims in 1620. And for centuries, this has been a symbol of new beginnings, perseverance, and maybe a little historical imagination, because not once did the Pilgrims actually mention this rock in their logs anywhere. Not in their letters, ship logs, or journals. It wasn't until 121 years later that Thomas Fonts, the grandson of a pilgrim by the same name, even mentioned that the rock was where the Pilgrims landed. And this only even came up because there was talk about moving the rock to make way for a wharf in the bay. At which point, 94-year-old grandson of a pilgrim went down to the bay and said, "Please don't move that rock. And here's why." And that's when the legend took root, and it's grown ever since. Anyone who's been through elementary school in America knows how symbolic and relevant this rock is to American history. It's a symbol. And in 1774, when the rock was actually split in two, it was seen as a sign that England and the colonies would also soon split as well. And as a marker of freedom and independence, obviously people who sell souvenirs wanted to get their hands on it and slowly chipped away at this rock. And it's speculated that Plymouth Rock is only a third of its original size because of how many pieces of it were taken away. But let's scoot back to talk about the Mayflower. The Mayflower wasn't exactly the peak of luxury. It was a sturdy merchant ship meant to bring goods across the North Atlantic. And by the time it reached the New World, it had been at sea for 9 grueling weeks, braving storms and generally heinous conditions for everyone on board. And less than half of the original passengers made it to the following spring. Originally, the Pilgrims on the Mayflower weren't even aiming for Plymouth. They were aiming for the Hudson River near modern-day New York. Storms and shifting currents forced them north towards Cape Cod. And once they glimpsed land, they didn't sail straight to shore. Plymouth Harbor was too shallow. Once they got close enough, the Pilgrims actually had to wade through tidal flats to get to shore. And since we have no original records of the rock from the Pilgrims, this next part is speculative, but this is the exact point that this little rock may have come in handy for these wary voyagers. Back when Plymouth Rock was a little bit bigger because it hadn't been pillaged for souvenirs, it was likely prominent enough to keep line of sight from the tidal flats, possibly helping the Pilgrims navigate when they were trying to reach shore. Some accounts suggest it was even used as an anchor point. Planks from the ship tied to the rock could have made a makeshift gangplank to avoid sinking in the mud or being swept away. Even if it wasn't the official landing site, it might have still been practically useful to these pilgrims, lending a rocky metaphorical hand to these shivering voyagers just trying to find stable footing. And while this human story is only a few centuries old, the rock itself is much, much older than that. Nearly 600 million years old to be exact. And it has also seen trials, tribulations, and a little bit of mystery. If the Pilgrims did set foot on this rock, it was actually at a time that geology wasn't even a science. And so people didn't really know what it was at the time they were stepping on it. So for centuries, we didn't actually know what the rock was made of. But in the 1980s, New Yorker writer and geologist John McPhee actually sent samples of the Plymouth Rock to Ian Zen, a leading authority on Massachusetts granites. Zen didn't use any formal geochemical analyses like X-ray fluorescence or trace element analysis, but he did use petrography and petrology, and he inspected thin sections under a microscope. What he noticed were large pink potassium feldspar grains with characteristic perthitic exsolution textures. He noticed quartz grains with characteristic intergrowths, the inclusion of tiny accessory minerals called sphene or titanite in a characteristic blood red color. And the granite contained 2 distinct feldspars, potassium feldspar and plagioclase feldspar. And since Zen was the leading authority on granites in the area, he said without a doubt that this was the Dedham Granite, a 630 to 590 million year old granite from eastern Massachusetts. But here's the catch. No geochemical analyses have been done since he claimed that, so we don't know definitively if Plymouth Rock is actually the Dedham Granite and from this pluton. Zen's conclusion was purely petrographic and petrological in nature and based on mineral textures and accessory minerals. He looks like a trustworthy guy. I trust him. But maybe if you're looking for a master's thesis to do, go find a piece of the Plymouth Rock legally, grind it up, and throw it in an X-ray fluorescence machine and tell me if it's the same bulk geochemistry as the Dedham Granite. Somebody do this for me, please. I want it confirmed definitively. The Dedham Granite formed near the end of the Proterozoic era, when Proto-North America collided with volcanic island arcs. And this was only about 100 million years before the first animals crawled on land. So right before the Cambrian explosion, geologically speaking, right before. And was when the continents we know today were drifting apart. There was no Atlantic Ocean at this point. Europe and Africa were rifting away from modern day North America. So Plymouth Rock actually witnessed mountains forming, oceans opening, and continents rearranging themselves. And was actually this close to being European, if not English. If it had been only a few miles to the east, tectonics could have made it a very different political story. And Plymouth Rock itself is actually a pilgrim in its own right because it's a glacial erratic, which means it was carried south by ice sheets during the last ice age about 20,000 years ago. The glacier plucked it from its original Dedham outcrop and transported it possibly hundreds of miles and left it behind to greet the pilgrims. In a sense, Plymouth Rock was actually the first pilgrim in the area before the pilgrims even got there. And for a short time, there was huge fear that this rock that was such a huge American symbol was actually Canadian, because it was known that it was a glacial erratic and we didn't know how far it came. So people were kind of losing their minds that, oh, this American symbol might have been Canadian, but nope, we have confirmed that it is actually American made. Not geochemically yet. Someone go do it. So the next time you see Plymouth Rock, first of all, wonder, why is it in a cage? It's the closest thing to a pet rock zoo that we have. And secondly, remember, while the pilgrims may not have explicitly mentioned it in their logs, it was witness to deep time before life even existed on Earth. Continents drifting and rearranging themselves, glaciers carving and depositing rocks across the continent, and eventually human symbolism. I'm the Cosmic Geologist, and if you liked this story, hit that subscribe button and I'll see you in the next video.